Damien Knox built an empire no one could trace. Specter enforced its rules without ever showing his face. Together, they led the Black Vultures, an underground syndicate that infiltrated cities, corporations, and government systems across the U.S. For nearly a decade, they were untouchable. But when a quiet accountant stumbled onto a single false invoice, it triggered a federal investigation that would expose one of the most secretive and dangerous criminal networks in American history. This is the story of how a hidden empire collapsed, and the two shadows that vanished with it. In 2012, the industrial outskirts of Cleveland, Ohio, were slowly deteriorating. Shuttered factories, abandoned rail yards, and a growing sense of isolation filled the air. It was here, hidden behind rusted steel doors and broken glass, that a criminal organization known as the Black Vultures was born. Their rise was not flashy, and their presence went unnoticed for years, but it would go on to shake the foundations of the U.S. law enforcement community. At the center of it all was Damien Knox, a man with no criminal record, no online presence, and no personal ties that could easily be traced. To those who knew him on the surface, he was a logistics consultant, soft-spoken and disciplined. But beneath that calm exterior was a mastermind who understood how to turn chaos into order. Damien had studied crime not through participation, but through observation. He read court cases, followed patterns of failed criminal empires, and learned from their mistakes. His vision was not to dominate the streets with brute force, but to build a network so hidden, so structured, that it could not be dismantled. Through conventional methods, the Black Vultures began as a small crew of 6, involved in stealing high-performance vehicles and stripping them for parts. They weren't flashy. No wild chases, no viral videos, no tattoos that announced their name. Everything was quiet. Even their first string of burglaries targeted warehouses instead of homes, always choosing buildings that were already reported as inactive. They moved fast, struck with surgical precision, and disappeared before anyone realized what had been taken. Damien didn't recruit like other gang leaders. He didn't go after kids on the street or intimidate people into, joining. He sought out individuals with unique skill sets, ex-military operatives who missed the structure of command, hackers who had been cast out of tech circles for illegal activity, former white-collar criminals who had served time but couldn't re-enter society. Each recruit was given a new identity and a specific role, treated not as a subordinate, but as a cog in a highly efficient machine. By 2014, the Black Vultures had grown into a silent force operating out of 3 states. One of their most strategic moves came with their entry into the synthetic drug market. Instead of competing with existing gangs for territory, Damien focused on digital distribution. The gang created a dark web storefront, using cryptocurrency for all transactions. They partnered with overseas manufacturers to produce high-purity synthetic drugs, then distributed them through a network of freelance couriers who never knew who they were working for. Packages were disguised as ordinary shipments: coffee, beans, book orders, gardening tools. To authorities, it looked like standard commerce. But in truth, hundreds of thousands of dollars in narcotics were moving through suburban neighborhoods undetected. As profits surged, the Black Vultures expanded into arms trafficking. This wasn't street-level gun sales. They trafficked military-grade equipment, often acquired through corrupt overseas contracts. Damien orchestrated deals that routed weapons through Eastern Europe, then into the United States using ports with lax oversight. Everything was cataloged, moved, and delivered with military precision. There was no room for freelance activity, no internal betrayals, and no one who dared to cross him. By 2016, the gang's network spanned 17 states, with safe houses in Atlanta, Detroit, Minneapolis, and Sacramento. Each city operated like a branch: office, managers, schedules, supply chains, and contingency plans. There were no street tags, no visible signs of turf war, and no chaos. The Black Vultures didn't seek attention, and that was exactly why no one saw them coming. One of their greatest strengths was their internal security. Every member was required to undergo routine lie detection interviews using voice analysis software. Meetings were never held in person unless absolutely necessary, and most members only knew 2 or 3 others within the organization. If one branch was compromised, it wouldn't affect the others. Damien had studied the collapse of other gangs, and he knew that loose communication, emotional leadership, and ego were the usual downfalls. So he eliminated all of it. Even his own location was a secret. Some members believed he was in Mexico. Others thought he lived in Cleveland under a false name. No one really knew, and that was by design. Despite their size and power, no one in law enforcement even knew the name Black Vultures until late 2020. By then, they had laundered tens of millions of dollars through real estate investments, tech startups, and fake consulting agencies. They had even begun investing in legitimate businesses to strengthen their cover: car dealerships, gyms, and high-end laundromats. On the surface, everything looked legal. But beneath it all was one of the most tightly run criminal syndicates in recent U.S. history. And yet, for all its strength, the Black Vultures had one flaw: a belief that their perfection made them untouchable. That arrogance would prove to be their undoing. In early 2021, a routine audit by the Internal Revenue Service in Pittsburgh triggered a chain of events that would expose the hidden core of the Black Vultures empire. It began with a man named Colin Reyes, a 38-year-old IRS analyst, known for his meticulous nature and dry attitude. Colin wasn't looking for crime. He was simply doing his job, combing through paperwork for inconsistencies. But when he stumbled upon a string of nearly identical tax filings tied to small, inactive businesses across Ohio and Pennsylvania, something didn't sit right. Each business listed substantial expenses, consulting fees, logistics costs, and maintenance charges, but generated no income. They were all registered to empty buildings or locations that hadn't been in use for years. Reyes flagged the anomalies and escalated the issue, believing it could be a fraud ring or tax evasion scheme. What he didn't realize was that he had just uncovered part of a carefully built laundering operation used by the Black Vultures to clean millions of dollars in dirty money. The report eventually landed on the desk of FBI Special Agent Marla Grayson, who had been investigating a growing number of financial crimes tied to fake corporations. She had no idea who Damien Knox was or what the Black Vultures were, but she had a hunch that something bigger was hiding in plain sight. Using the flagged businesses as a starting point, she mapped the owners, transactions, and addresses. Patterns began to emerge. Some of the businesses were linked to others across state lines, and several shared financial service providers and mailing addresses. One address in particular kept appearing: a shipping and logistics firm located on the outskirts of Dayton, Ohio. The firm, Delta Prime Freight, appeared legitimate on paper, but the numbers didn't match up. It hadn't moved any product in over 2 years, yet it reported continuous expenses and bank activity. When agents began looking into the company's finances, they found that the money wasn't coming from freight contracts. It was being funneled in from dozens of smaller businesses across the country. The financial manager at Delta Prime Freight was a woman named Erica Lang. A former accountant with no criminal record, she had been hired 4 years earlier to oversee daily operations and payroll. At first, she thought nothing of the company's structure. She assumed it was like any other quiet logistics firm. But over time, she noticed discrepancies: employee names she never met, payments to vendors that didn't exist, and transactions that were always one day too late or $1 off from standard benchmarks. Rather than report it immediately, Erica began documenting the inconsistencies. She saved bank records, internal emails, and payment receipts, slowly piecing together a hidden network of shell companies. Knowing she could be in danger if she exposed what she found, she secretly stored the files on a USB drive and placed it in a safety deposit box under a fake name. She told no one. When the FBI questioned Erica about Delta Prime Freight, she stayed calm. She admitted something felt off but claimed she had no hard proof. Then, 3 weeks later, she mailed an anonymous tip to the field office in Cleveland. Inside was a note directing them to a safety deposit box at a local credit union. When agents opened it, they found the USB drive labeled simply transfers. The data on the drive was explosive. It included detailed transaction logs that linked over 60 shell companies to a centralized money pool. It mapped out the funneling process from street-level cash collections to the final stages of corporate investment laundering. For the first time, federal agents could see the full skeleton of the Black Vultures' financial structure. The documents listed offshore bank accounts, IP logs from internal servers, and an encrypted folder labeled Command. Inside that folder was a spreadsheet naming key operatives, some of whom had military backgrounds, others listed as consultants in different states. Most of the names were aliases, but one stood out. A username tagged as Knox1 referenced multiple times as the origin of directives. Investigators still didn't know who Damien Knox was, but this was the first concrete digital trail that hinted at a centralized leader giving orders. Marla Grayson requested a federal task force to begin investigating the Black Vultures full-time. Surveillance was placed on the identified properties, and attempts were made to follow the money backward through the layered accounts. The more they dug, the more complex the network became. It wasn't just drugs or weapons, it was property. Deals, tech investments, shell donations to charities, even stock purchases made through fake identities. The Black Vultures had created an ecosystem of crime that touched nearly every aspect of modern finance. But the biggest revelation was still to come. Embedded deep in the files was a coded contact list with references to 5 unknown individuals, each linked to a different operation. These 5 were referred to only by code names: Specter, Drift, Hollow, Maze, and Echo. The files were heavily encrypted, but analysts believe these were the lieutenants who ran the core divisions of the Black Vultures empire. With this discovery, the investigation shifted from financial tracing to active pursuit. The gang's name was finally spoken aloud in federal briefings. The Black Vultures were no longer invisible. The hunt had officially begun. Once the FBI decrypted the files recovered from Erica Lang's USB drive, the real scope of the Black Vultures empire came into focus. What agents had initially assumed was a sophisticated money laundering scheme was actually just one layer of a meticulously structured criminal machine. The names in the files, Specter, Drift, Hollow, Maze, and Echo, were the linchpins of the organization, each overseeing a key sector. Specter controlled weapons trafficking, Drift managed drug distribution, Hollow handled digital operations. Maze ran internal security and logistics, and Echo was responsible for laundering and investment. These codenames were not random. They reflected how each lieutenant functioned: invisible, fluid, hollow in presence, tangled in complexity, and impossible to echo or trace. Within days of confirming their significance, the FBI launched Operation Hollow Flight, a coordinated offensive to bring down the entire network. In a 3-week blitz, agents executed more than 40 synchronized raids across 10 states. They struck warehouses in Detroit, seized server farms in Nevada, raided safe houses in Kansas City, and shut down front businesses in Portland and Chicago. In each location, they found evidence of vulture activity: unregistered weapons, encrypted laptops, burner phones, fake IDs, and stacks of cash wrapped in electrical tape. 74 members were arrested in the initial sweep. Most were mid- to low-level operators, but some had critical roles. One of the most valuable captures was a courier coordinator in St. Louis who unknowingly revealed drop-off routes and communication protocols. Still, despite the success of the raids, Damien Knox remained a ghost. His name never appeared in property records, phone records, or even surveillance. The deeper they went, the clearer it became that he had engineered every part of the network to function without direct links to him. This was when a critical lead came from an unexpected source. Among those arrested in a Phoenix raid was a 24-year-old hacker named Kelsey Brand, known online by the alias Orchid Circuit. Unlike most members, Kelsey wasn't hardened or prepared. Faced with the possibility of decades in prison, she chose to cooperate. She had worked for Hollow, the digital arm of the Vultures, and her job had been to maintain internal communications and firewall protections. She had access to one of their heavily encrypted servers, used by the lieutenants to coordinate with one another under Damien's indirect supervision. Kelsey agreed to help agents breach the system in exchange for a reduced sentence and protection. It took days, but her access finally allowed them into a data hub that stored months of internal messages, routing schedules, and financial reports. Inside, agents found something unexpected: detailed behavioral profiles on law enforcement officials, mapped movement routes of surveillance vehicles, and a disturbing number of images taken from drones, evidence that the Black Vultures had been watching federal agents long before the FBI ever knew who they were. Even more alarming was the revelation that the 5 lieutenants had never met each other in person. Each had been recruited separately, operated under strict compartmentalization, and reported up a chain that never allowed them direct contact with Damien. The entire organization had been designed to be immune to collapse. If one part was compromised, the others could continue operating independently. But the breach gave the FBI the upper hand. Now, armed with locations, aliases, and movement schedules, they launched the second phase of Operation Hollow Flight. The first to fall was Echo, tracked to a beachfront condo in Fort Lauderdale. Next was Hollow, found hiding in a rural farmhouse in Idaho. Drift was located in a private hospital in San Diego, recovering from a reported car accident. Maze, always moving, was caught in Dallas during a late-night highway stop. All were apprehended within 10 days. Each arrest delivered new intel, digital keys, safe house maps, physical documents, all pointing to the existence of something even larger: a recovery plan prepared in the event of collapse. Damien had accounted for the possibility of law enforcement interference and had created protocols for the lieutenants to regroup, disappear, or restart the network from scratch. Only one of the 5 remained: Specter. Unlike the others, Specter had never used digital channels, left no identifiable patterns, and had no confirmed sightings. Former members spoke of him in vague terms: tall, quiet, always wearing gloves, always watching. Some speculated he was a myth, created to scare members into obedience. Others swore they had met him, briefly, in moments of correction or punishment. Surveillance footage from one warehouse showed a figure matching Specter's vague description entering just minutes before a raid, then vanishing through a back exit. That was the last known visual of him. With 4 of the 5 lieutenants captured, the Black Vultures began to crumble from within. Lower-ranking members, sensing the fall, turned on one another. Former partners revealed caches of hidden assets. Informants surfaced, and yet the center of the web, Damien Knox, remained untouched. No bank account, no passport, no clear image, no fingerprint. The empire he had built over nearly a decade was collapsing in real time. Yet, its architect was still out there, and one of his most dangerous agents had slipped through the cracks. By late 2022, the Black Vultures were no longer operating as a cohesive force. With most of their infrastructure dismantled and 4 of the 5 lieutenants in custody, federal agencies believed they were on the verge of closing the most complex criminal investigation in recent U.S. history. However, the 2 figures that continued to haunt investigators were the ones who mattered most: Damien Knox, the elusive mastermind, and Specter, his most dangerous and unpredictable operative. Every captured member offered fragments of information, but none could answer the central question: where was Knox, and how had he stayed hidden? The FBI, alongside Homeland Security and Interpol, began to reassess everything they thought they knew. One analyst proposed that Knox had never left Cleveland, theorizing that hiding in plain sight would be safer than disappearing. Others suggested he had fled the country years ago, using fake passports and a trail of misdirection. Investigators scoured facial recognition databases, border crossing records, and even old satellite imagery. Nothing surfaced. Every possibility led to a dead end. Then came a break. one that seemed small at first. A burned-out apartment complex in East Chicago, abandoned for years, was flagged by a local fire department after they responded to a report of suspicious activity. Inside, they found traces of electronic equipment, charred hard drives, and fragments of documents. When forensic experts examined the wreckage, they recovered partial files from a destroyed laptop. Among them was a single encrypted folder labeled Architect 0. The FBI's cyber unit worked around the clock to decrypt the files. It took nearly a week, but what they found changed everything. The folder contained internal memos, personal reflections, and a long, coded journal written by Damien Knox himself. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It read more like a record he had kept for his own purposes. Through careful analysis, the FBI identified references to old meeting points, past operations, and most importantly, a contingency plan titled Silent Echo. Silent Echo outlined Knox's plan in the event of full organizational collapse. Rather than rebuild, the strategy was to vanish completely, erasing all traces, removing any remaining operatives, and destroying data that could lead to him. The journal revealed a chilling mindset. Knox had never intended to be caught. If the Empire was ever threatened, he would become a ghost, and Specter would be the only person authorized to carry out the final step, eliminating all remaining ties. 2 weeks later, in a quiet neighborhood outside Baltimore, a retired weapons dealer known to have once supplied the Vultures was found dead in his garage, shot twice in the chest. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence left behind, and no digital footprint of who had been there. The FBI immediately connected the hit to Specter. It was the first of 4 calculated killings over the next month, each targeting someone with knowledge of the organization. The message was clear. The cleanup had begun. Fear spread quickly among former associates. A few remaining Vultures fled the country. Others begged for protection in exchange for information. Through these interviews, agents began to sketch the outline of Specter's movements. He had no fixed location, traveled under a series of aliases, and used abandoned homes and back roads to avoid detection. Yet he was closing in on something, or someone. It became evident that he wasn't just cleaning up after Knox. He was looking for him. For reasons still unknown, Specter had gone rogue. Internal files hinted at a falling out between the two, possibly due to Knox's decision to abandon the organization entirely. Some investigators believed Specter saw it as betrayal. Others suggested he wanted revenge. The last entry in Knox's decrypted journal added to the mystery. It read simply, "The wolf forgets he was led from the woods." On February 19, 2023, an anonymous tip led authorities to a luxury cabin deep in the Allegheny National Forest. When agents arrived, they found a silent scene. No gunfire, no alarms, just a heavy quiet that felt staged. Inside, on the top floor, they discovered the body of a man believed to be Damien Knox. No identification was found, and his fingerprints had been chemically burned. Dental records were inconclusive, but scars and physical descriptions matched. Witness accounts. Lying next to him was a single spent shell casing and a silenced pistol. There were no signs of a struggle. Specter was never found. Surveillance footage from a gas station 20 miles from the cabin showed a hooded figure entering a stolen vehicle 2 hours before the body was discovered. Facial recognition failed. The trail ended there. The collapse of the Black Vultures was complete, but the story never truly closed. The identity of Specter remained unknown. Conspiracies spread that he had taken Knox's place, that he was Knox all along, or that he continued to operate in the shadows under a new name. The FBI ended the investigation officially in late 2023, concluding that the criminal empire had been dismantled beyond recovery. But for those who had worked the case, closure was a hollow concept. Damien Knox had built an empire of silence, and even in death, he left behind only questions. What drove him? How did he build so much without ever being seen? And if Specter was still out there, what was he waiting for?